Hello, is anyone on the call?
This is Amanda.
Hi, I'm so sorry I was late. I couldn't get the audio to work.
Don't worry, Jennifer. We're in practice mode right now, so it's okay.
What time does it start?
8:30.
Okay. Oh, good. I can't show my screen either.
Okay, I'll make you presenter. There. Um, there we go. How's that?
All right. Can you see my screen?
I can. Yay.
All right.
And then in like 7 minutes, I'd say even like 10 minutes.
Oh,
well,
okay.
7 minutes, I'll announce that it's going to start, and 3, and then we'll start it at like 8:33, just in case people are waiting to, give them a couple of minutes to log in. Can you send
That
me,
sounds awesome.
when you're done or when you get a chance, will you send me your PowerPoint so that I can turn it into a PDF and send it out later in case people want to view your slides?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for doing this for us. We really appreciate this.
Oh, no problem. Let me try and switch to my headset. I don't know if it'll work.
Okay.
I forgot. Are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
I forgot to charge my headset, so I don't know how long it'll tell me if it goes out.
Darn.
Oh, dear. All right. Now I need that. So you're all set on your end.
Yep. I'll field questions, and then if there's any that we don't get to, I'll make sure I send them to you. And then if you don't mind, maybe like writing in a couple of simple answers, and then I'll send them out. I'll send them out with the answers out with the follow-up email.
Sounds good. And
Okay.
can you also unmute people if they are muted? That's a problem we often have.
I will do my very best. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't.
Exactly. Sometimes I wind up unmuting people 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, me too.
Just seeing what I wrote here.
These are really great slides.
Oh, well, thank you. I pilfered from 2 books unashamedly.
Ain't nothing wrong with that.
I did give them credit. Do they see your organizer notes, I wonder?
I don't think so, as long as you're in presenter mode. Like, as long as, like, you're in, like, slide mode. Does that make sense?
Like this mode I'm in?
No, I can see your notes in that mode. But if you go to slideshow, I wouldn't be able to see it.
But then can I see them? Let's see.
That's the question.
I'll be able to see them. Oh, yes, I can, right over here.
Oh, perfect.
Yay. Now they'll be able to see this thing. It's bigger than it usually is. There we go. How's it going on your end?
Oh, just fine. We're in Everett right now. We did a fidelity review and got done early, so I'm in the hotel room.
Oh, nice. Nice. I was at Pure Apocalypse, so I came home a day early.
Did you? How did it go?
What?
How did the Pure Apocalypse go?
There was some good stuff. There was,
Yeah?
yeah, there were, the keynotes were really great. There was a lot of cultural stuff, a lot of veteran stuff, kind of some unusual stuff. I went because Oregon has a really strong political peer movement. And so I went to go to all those advocacy to action meetings and see what they were up to. So that was great.
Right on.
Oregon and New York were the first to really organize a consumer movement.
I didn't realize that.
Of all places. I don't know why it was Oregon. I think it must have just been people in Oregon.
Well, Oregon's pretty liberal. It's nice to.
I have a webinar to do. Sorry, just talking to David Reed, getting out of the leadership meeting.
Yeah.
What were you saying?
I said, yeah, no leadership meeting.
Yeah, I'm really sad about that.
All right, one more minute, and then I will take it out of practice mode, and I'll let everybody know we're going to start in a few minutes. So after that, they'll be able to hear us talking. So we just, heads up.
Okay. How many attendees do you show? None.
Well, we won't be able to see them now, but we had 134 registrants, I believe.
Does that mean 50 will show up?
Or more. Usually we do at least half of them show up, if not more. So.
Yeah.
Okay, Jennifer, I'm going to take you out of practice mode. Okay?
Okay, done practicing.
All right, here we go. Good morning, Washington State. This is Amanda Polly with DBHR. We're going to go ahead and get started here in about 3 minutes if you hold on for us. Thank you very much. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started now. My name is Amanda Pauley, and I'm with DBHR, the Department of Behavioral Health and Recovery through the Healthcare Authority of Washington State. We're presenting to you a webinar today on building natural supports by Jennifer Bliss. She's our manager of the Office of Consumer Partnerships through DBHR as well. We all know how difficult it can be to build natural supports in our personal life, let alone help our participants build natural supports. And Jennifer today is going to help us with a few tips and guidance through that process. And Jennifer, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. And I'll be here to help field questions. Raise your hands, go ahead and write questions into the chat box, and I'll be here to help. Thank you.
Good morning. This is Jennifer Bliss, and I'm really pleased to be here with you guys today. This has been a fun production to put together to think about natural supports and what it takes to build those natural supports and help others with natural supports. Natural supports are, excuse me, 1 second, I need to change my headset. Amanda, can you still hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I had to change my headset. So connections are an essential part of recovery. One of the SAMHSA concepts of recovery is that recovery is supported by peers and allies. So when you help someone form connections, you're furthering their recovery, and part of what we often call becoming a recovery ambassador. And relationships formed with peers in the community often lead to networking opportunities, leadership opportunities, and advocacy. People on the line can talk, right, Amanda?
You mean, are they unmuted?
Yes.
Negatory.
Can you unmute everybody?
I can try my best. Give me just 1 second. I'll do what I can here.
Okay. And anybody who's unmuted, I'm wondering if you've had formal supports to start out with. In other words, therapists, case managers, psychiatrists, and other providers who helped in your recovery. Has anyone had formal supports that were helpful in their recovery? Go ahead if you can.
Jennifer, unmuting everybody might be a little difficult, but we have people typing in answers. I have somebody, Tammy, saying yes, that she's answering your question with a yes. And then, let's see. I apologize. I'm just trying to go up through the questions in any way I can here. When I pull everybody off of mute, it gets very loud. So
okay.
If our attendees wouldn't mind muting their own phones, I can pull everybody off of mute this way. And then if you wouldn't mind muting your own, and then April McCabe says, yes, therapists have supported me. So that way, if I pull you off of mute, we don't have a lot of background noise. And if you want to speak, you could just unmute your own phone. That would be great.
And you can type a message too.
Yes, and that's acceptable as well.
I know on my part, before I started developing natural supports, I was quite isolated for a while, and my therapists and case managers were some of the only people in my life that I did feel connected to. Are there any other comments?
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for all your help. I really, really appreciate it. And I will get those income verifications today. Okay.
Uh-huh.
No, I don't think so. All right. Thanks, you too. Bye.
Thank you. So what are natural supports and how do they help in recovery? Natural supports are people who are not paid, who are in the community, who are people like family and friends and people in a faith community. What other kinds of natural supports have you built and how have they contributed to your recovery? Anyone want to put an answer in chat? If you can hear anything, Amanda, just repeat back what people are saying.
Somebody said AA and my cat.
Yeah.
I went ahead and muted everybody. It's just there's a lot of background noise. So if somebody wants to speak, go ahead and raise your hand and I'll pull you off of mute myself, okay? Sorry about that, guys. We're just not going to be able to have everybody off of mute at the same time. Thomas reported in here, relationships through IOP groups are helpful for him too.
When we talk about connections, can you still hear me?
I can hear you. Can everybody else hear her? Okay.
Said unmuted. Okay. I like to talk about 4 different kinds of connections. Connections with yourself, connections with others, connections to your environment, and connections to a higher purpose. And you need to work on all 4 of these to be able to form connections, connections that are solid and connections that are fulfilling. Peer counselor role, forming relationships outside of services can take a lot of work, and they're not skills that everyone learns. Peer supporters and others can help people to choose relationships, share who they are, share your thoughts and feelings, have mutual relationships, not relationships that are one way or just service-oriented, but are truly mutual, to help people learn to deal with conflict in a constructive way and to listen actively. And some of those are skills that you learned in peer counselor training, but they are skills that we continually work on. And people can practice those skills with you and other providers, and then they can broaden those skills to use them with their natural supporters. So connecting with yourself, one of the first steps is accepting, acknowledging our reality without judgment or self-blame. That's a pretty tough one. But in order to have good relationships with other people, we need to feel at least a little bit confident about who we are and that we're worth having a relationship with. So getting rid of the judgment and self-blame is really important. And again, that's something peer counselors can help with, about giving people hope and faith in themselves. Sometimes our history has taught us things that are pretty negative about accepting ourselves. We may have grown up in families that were non-accepting, or just had lots of social interactions that were non-accepting that have taught us things about ourselves that were pretty negative. And we all need to learn to override those negative messages. If you've ever had cognitive behavioral therapy, which I highly recommend, that's a way of changing negative messages to positive messages, to recognizing negative messages and the wrong messages they are, and then changing them to positive messages. So I really like that. that therapy. Self-connection is important because accepting yourself leads to compassion. It reduces our pain and suffering and leaves us more opening to relationships. If you're spending a lot of time thinking to yourself about how much pain you're in and the issues you have, you don't have a lot of time to work with others and to be open to meeting others and in a friendly, positive way. And having some acceptance also gives us courage to take more steps in recovery. Stress is not a helpful thing in recovery. It's not a helpful thing anywhere. If you are feeling a lot of stress, it tells us that you need to stop what you're doing and try something else. Our stress reactions are also part of the solution. And denial about the need to change is usually pretty strong. Sorry about that. So you can do an acceptance inventory. Is there something you're currently struggling to accept, usually about yourself? And what is it? We all have things that we are struggling to accept or that we don't care about ourselves and things that we'd like to improve. But if you can identify those things that you are struggling to accept about yourself, and think about what makes it difficult to accept. Is it your history? Is it the way society looks at you? Is it just messages you're sending yourself? And how would it be helpful to you in accepting yourself? And what steps would you need to take to accept this? Just accept it, not necessarily change it, but accept yourself as you are. Where and how you live affects your ability to form connections. I like the way Mary Ellen Copeland in RAP talks about living space, and that your living space affects your recovery, that your living space should be one that gives you peace and security, that when you go home that it should be a comfortable place. And so you should evaluate whether your living space helps you have a sense of harmony with yourself. And that's something you can do with peers. It doesn't always mean moving or moving to an expensive location. It can just mean bringing comfortable things in or comfort items in or decorating in a new way or getting a pet. But when you go home, in order to be really fully connected with yourself and others, you need to have that sense of comfort, somewhere to go where you can relax and feel a sense of harmony. There's environmental barriers sometimes frequently to making connections. There's transportation, rural and small communities, unsafe communities. For some, moving frequently prevents making firm connections. Homelessness and home responsibilities such as caretaking or strategies. So if we look at each one, in transportation, you can certainly work on knowing the resources in the community. You can ask your network of family and friends and providers about alternate transportation. You can think about getting a bike or a car, if feasible, to work on transportation. If you work in a rural or small community, you could work on connections by internet or phone and take every social opportunity and make every effort you can. If you live in an unsafe community, that's really difficult. I think the most important thing is to find some safe people to connect with, to always go accompanied by people that you know, and there's taxis and Ubers if you can manage those, and to visit people outside the community where you feel more safe, and of course, ideally, to move. Homelessness is also one that's really difficult. You can often find connections with people who are in the same situation or living in the same area as you are. such as in shelters. There's churches that you can investigate, um, and groups at your provider agency. Home responsibilities sometimes prevent people from making connections, and you can look for, of course, any day services that are available. Sometimes often when I go around to town halls and integration forums, the managed care organizations will say, well, this service is available or that service is available, and people have no idea that the service is even available. So it's always important to encourage your peers to ask if there are services to help with respite or caretaking or childcare. And you can also turn to family if feasible. There's nothing wrong with asking. Sometimes you need to give them the opportunity. If you never ask, you don't know if there are resources available. And the same with your friends, or there can be child care exchange or people that might be willing to come in for an afternoon. And those are some strategies that I could think of to help with those barriers. And I'm sure you can think of more. Connecting others. I use this resource from Daniel Spaniel a lot. It's called Connections, and you might want to look at that book. It's really good. And he said we need to be big enough to create a space for ourselves and humble enough to enter their world when invited. I like that. Our history of relationships are embedded in us, and we tend to repeat patterns. I don't know if you've noticed that about yourself, but I certainly have. Sometimes I get in the habit of forming friendships that are kind of superficial, and they're the kind where you go out to lunch and you go out to a movie, and that's the nature of the friendship. And and then I'll forget to do the other things. Come over and hang out for dinner. Let's talk. Let's go for a walk around the park. Opportunities to really increase your friendship and deepen your friendship. And those are questions you can ask your peers. And if they have a history of a certain kind of relationship or a certain level of relationship, and we'll talk about deepening those a little bit later. And relationships often require us to let go of intense feelings, of needs to control, and of criticism. Those are barriers to connecting with others. Everyone's alone sometime, and everyone experiences loneliness. Loneliness is not unusual, and it's not something that we, consider an illness. Some people don't have enough relationships to sustain them, and they experience higher levels of loneliness. And the main level is that if you are feeling too lonely, that you have to do something. Loneliness will not go away on its own, in my experience. And peer supporters can help people figure out how to build relationships to relieve loneliness. I think that when you are thinking about building connections with others, it's really important to look at the connections you have and your history with connections, because you have lived experience that can really help the peers that you work with. So if you think about if you've ever experienced loneliness, or if you do today, what do you feel? Do you feel that you're too lonely, and what gets in the way of change? So there's many kinds of relationships: romantic relationships, acquaintances, friendships, family, neighbor, casual, or providers. And sometimes, I want to go to this other slide. Sometimes I've seen this diagram used a number of times where you have this inner circle of intimate friends and an outer circle of friends. Intimate friends are people that you tell your most closely held feelings and share the most with. And friends, to me, are things that you do things with regularly and have fun with. And acquaintances are people you know that you might ask to borrow a bit of bread from, or say, how are you doing? And then your general tribe. And to me, that I think of peers. So you might take a second and just write down, how many people do you have in your closest circle? And think about whether you'd like to have more people in that circle, whether that circle feels satisfying to you. And friends, whether you have enough friends to kind of keep you busy. Some people have so many friends they can't keep up with them, and some people don't have enough friends to call on a Saturday and go to a movie or take a walk with. And so I think you need to have an adequate number of each level of friendship to have satisfying connections. So what qualities do you find important? This is a good question to ask peers. Many people include things like liking somebody. You just have to like someone. Having trust in them and respect. Keeping confidences, that can be really important. Being non-judgmental and non-critical. Accepting. And having common interests. There's a lot of other things you could add. Who have time to do things that you like to do, who are fun, who challenges you in some way, who challenge you in some way. So people have different qualities that they're looking for in a friend. And this is another really good question to ask people when they're trying to develop friendships. What are you looking for in a friend? So this is a good exercise. You can list 5 people who could give you support, maybe who aren't currently, but who could. And identify how you would ask them for help. Could you go to a family member and say, if I were feeling really down, could I call you and could you just help distract me and make me laugh? Or if I was feeling really lonely, could I call you and could we do something sometime? Sometimes they can be very simple requests, and people are often very willing to give support, but we have to be willing to let them know what our needs are, and that's the same for the peers that you work with. Where do you find relationships? Every person in every community is different, and people have different preferences. You can ask friends and families about groups and activities in your area. You can ask providers for ideas. You can call volunteer opportunities such as senior centers, shelters, animal shelters, and food banks. There's a website I like called Meetup. I don't know if any of you have used it, but meetups are groups that are just formed in the community around a common interest, and it's kind of fun to go to those. I joined a photography meetup once, and all they did was they'd pick a place for a photo shoot, and one of them was the rose gardens at Point Defiance, the rose gardens at Point Defiance. And we went and we all shot pictures of roses and flowers, and it was kind of fun because there were advanced photographers there and you could ask questions about what lenses to take. And I didn't develop any deep friendships there, but I think that if I kept going, that I would have met people, and that was a good way to go. But there are knitting groups and walking groups and new to the area groups and under 30 groups. Anyway, there's a lot of groups in some areas, so it's something to consider. And peer groups, that's very sensitive. Peer groups, there are some peer groups in our area, and that kind of depends on where you live, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. And I'd like you to think about if you've ever decided to make a new friend or develop a friendship, and how did you do it? Once I was thinking, a couple of friends of mine moved away, and I was feeling a little bit down about that, and I sat down and I thought about, okay, who do I know that I would like to be friends with? And I did it pretty deliberately. And I thought of someone who I had used to carpool with very frequently, and we'd been close. And since I moved jobs, I hadn't seen her very much. And so I decided to call her up, and she was pretty surprised. But we went to a show together, and we've been seeing each other pretty soon and pretty frequently. And she's helped me with some writing projects, and it's been really delightful. So it's good to start with what you have, just people you know, and think about what you'd like, whether you'd like to develop a friendship with them. Everybody knows people. They might not be friends with them, but everybody knows some people, and that's a great place to start. Sometimes people say, "I have no friends," and as if it was a blank slate and they were the only person in the universe. But in reality, they know people. People know people. They interact with people at even at doctor's offices or providers' offices, or where they live in their community. So that's a really good place to start. Keeping a relationship is another challenge. In order to keep a relationship, you need to share a little bit about who you are. Otherwise, the relationship is always going to be really superficial and may not last. It depends on the situation, and the pace is important, but you should consider how to develop trust and the importance of the relationship. You're sharing some vulnerabilities, what offends you, or what, that's not the best word, but what could hurt your feelings, and what is bothering you, how you could benefit from the friendship, and what benefits you are getting from the benefit, and just listening. Barriers to relationships. Sometimes peers we work with are running into barriers because they haven't learned how to form or keep relationships. So you can help a peer think about things that may be getting in the way of close relationships, complaining or criticizing. And if you work with a peer and you notice that this is a frequent characteristic in your interactions, then it's something that you might encourage them to think about when they're developing relationships. Would you like to have a friend that complains all the time or criticizes you all the time? I don't know anybody that would. So talking about how to be positive in a relationship and complimentary and, have an upbeat attitude as much as possible. Failing to keep in touch. A lot of people will call somebody, and I'm bad at this. I'll call somebody and then I won't talk to them for a month, and then think about them and call them up again, and we just lose touch a little bit that way, especially with family. But in order to keep friendships, it takes a little work. You have to email or message occasionally, and call and make appointments to see them, and do some work to keep your connection network up. Talking incessantly, being always needing to be the center of attention, that can be a problem in relationships, because relationships should be mutual. And being argumentative or negative. And this is another source I used a lot in this presentation, is the Loneliness Workbook. And that's a good resource if someone is working on natural supports and this is a real large goal for them, is forming connections. This is a workbook that is great to work through. Relationships can easily be bruised because we're more vulnerable when we're in a relationship or having a relationship with someone. One thing that is important, if you feel that your relationship has been impaired in some way, is to acknowledge that you've hurt someone. That means apologizing and telling someone how important they are, and that you value the action, that you value the relationship. And those are actions you can do to help repair relationships. Simply because someone gets mad at you is not a reason that you need to end the friendship, especially if it's been one that you found satisfying and you've had for a long time. So repairing relationships is a skill that can be built as well. Sometimes if someone's thinking about creating relationships, you can do a cost-benefit analysis. So example, what would be the cost of getting to know someone or starting up a conversation with someone or going to something? So the cost might be I might feel anxious and uncomfortable. And the benefit, I might enjoy the activity and become more comfortable in the future. And sometimes, of course, the cost would be too great, but generally they will find that the benefit would outweigh the cost. So this is a great exercise to do. Then there comes family. Sometimes family relationships are very supportive, and sometimes they're not. So if you think about your own family relationships and think about how they have supported your recovery. My family relationships, I would say, initially were not very supportive. I think the first time I was hospitalized, they were very supportive. There were flowers, there were visitors, there were books brought, and they were very supportive. But I've been hospitalized a number of times, and then they started getting a lot less supportive. Oh, she's in the hospital again. And, sort of infrequent visits and occasional calls, and it was a lot less supportive. And sometimes family relationships can cause difficulty in your recovery. You can have families that are non-accepting or judgmental of your difficulty, and sometimes they can be improved. And I'm wondering if you think about your family relationships and if you've done anything to improve them as time has gone on. I know that for me, when I was considering my challenges, I sat down with my family. We have these family nights once a month, and I sat down with my family and talked about my challenges and talked about mental health issues and what I experienced. And they were really surprised. They had no idea, and I assumed they did. And they didn't know very much about the challenge at all and what went with it. So sometimes education can be a really important piece of improving family relationships. And of course, there's also spending time with family. If you are distant from your family and you rarely go to family events, that makes family relationships difficult to sustain. Should think about the way that you treat family members. Are you non-judgmental and non-critical of them? Do you listen actively to them? Do you provide support? And do you give service? Those are all great ways of improving family relationships. I work very hard to have mutual relationships, and I like to look for opportunities to serve others, especially in my family. If someone is having surgery or a procedure done, to bring dinner or to babysit their kids, and just to support them on the phone or go over and listen to them talk about a challenge that they're having without everything always being about you. And sometimes when we're working about peers, when you're having challenges, it can be a really egocentric world where everything revolves around you. And when we go to our providers and have appointments, it kind of reinforces that the conversation is always about you and what you need and what you're experiencing. But when you're talking about relationships, you need to talk about what you're going to do for people as well as thinking about what they could do for you. Making efforts to stay in regular contact and talking about issues openly, perhaps with a counselor. I know once I think twice, I brought family to a counseling appointment. Once they met on their own with the counselor. My mother and father did. And it wasn't a really successful meeting, but they had a lot better idea of what I was doing. And then I also had my brother and sister-in-law come, and we talked about crisis and how to deal with crisis. And that was really productive. And they got to ask questions, and it was a lot more open about, what do you do when someone is self-destructive. And you can talk about, sometimes it's hard to discuss those issues without a little bit of help. Relationships are not always healthy, and sometimes it's the best choice to end them or limit them. How do you know when a relationship is unhealthy? If a relationship consistently makes you unhappy, if people are treating you badly when you are harmed, or you have intense feelings about harm from the past, or efforts to change the relationship haven't worked, that can really be a sign that you need to end or limit the relationship. You could ask a peer to evaluate. What prevents people from ending relationships? That can be an interesting question. Sometimes there's society expectations that families should be together. You may come from a society, or your peer may come from a culture where families are really important. And so they have a sense of obligation that they need to be part of the family and they need to fulfill a role. And you really need to balance your, how unhealthy it is versus your societal needs. There's sometimes beliefs in forgiveness, that you should forgive people, that you shouldn't hurt people's feelings, and feelings about not being assertive, that's not polite. And especially, again, that can be a cultural issue. And sometimes you feel that family's all you have, and so people will put up with just about anything because they're the only relationships they have. And so one of the solutions to that is developing more relationships. I know when my mother had a bipolar diagnosis, and she was very difficult to be around, and she was very demanding. She would call in the middle of the night. She would write long letters and want to have come and stay for weeks. And it was very challenging for me because our interactions were not that positive. And so I had to say to myself, what is going to make me feel like I'm meeting my obligations, and that will give her some sense of satisfaction. And once I wrote down and what I needed to do. I definitely needed to contact her on holidays, definitely needed to contact her a couple times a month, do something with her, but I didn't need to spend all the time that she was asking for. So sometimes that's another way relationships can be unhealthy, if they're asking more from you than you really have to give. I said before that we need safe, peaceful, relaxed environments. What environments are you connected to? The first one I think of is your living environment, which we talked to before, which is also your home environment. And there's also your work environment. We need to have safe work environments and relationships in our workplace. And connecting with our environment can also provide support. Connecting to a higher purpose. Being connected to something larger than ourselves leads to a deep feeling of purpose in life and connection. We can be motivated by our values. We can be more actively participating in life, and we could be connected to our spiritual center. And connecting to purpose helps people go beyond the social service system as they develop what their purpose in life is and what their higher meaning in life is. For many, the final stages of recovery is giving back. This is particularly true in the substance use field. Sometimes I'm very jealous of the 12-step community that some of my friends belong to. They are always having retreats and parties and celebrations, and they're always helping each other out, helping somebody move, going to support someone, helping someone that's sick. So they have really developed this culture of service that I think that everyone could learn from. Because service takes us out of ourselves. It takes us away from self-centeredness and into the community. It helps us develop natural supports, because when you serve someone else and you help somebody else, you increase the relationship and deepen the relationship. In advocacy work, which I am highly involved in, and peer networking is service toward others. When you work together with peers to develop peer support or advocate for peer support, that is service toward others. Other peers can be a very valuable sense of connection. I have a number of friends, and the friends who are peers are particularly valuable. They can say, how are you doing? And I can say, and they know kind of immediately what I'm talking about. I don't have to describe that I'm feeling a little down or that I'm having a little difficulty. And when we talk about trauma or we talk about, it's not like we always have these deep conversations about mental health issues, but we can. And it's just a wonderful thing to have that connection and know that somebody really gets you. So how do you find other peers? Some people find them in support groups. NAMI has a number of support groups. One's called Connections, and people can go to that, and it's just kind of a round robin of telling what's going on. And sometimes you can meet other peers there and gain peer support. It's not always super recovery oriented. Sometimes they can be people coming to complain and always be negative about what's going on. But sometimes you can really learn skills there, and they have other groups as well. There's peer organizations, and that depends on the area where you live. In statewide, I'll talk about in a second, but at clubhouses, at drop-in centers, at recovery cafes, those are places where you can meet other peers. And by being open with others, there are peers all around you that you may not know about. And when you talk about your issues, you may find someone say, oh, well, I have those issues too. And it's not at all uncommon in my experience. And the internet. I used to spend a fair amount of time in internet chat rooms, and they can be kind of interesting. They can also be very random, but there are internet chat rooms. I think DBSA, Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, has a chat group, and there's just a number if you go and Google them. And they can be a place to find someone to talk to online, especially if you're in a rural or isolated community. That might be a good option for you. When you become connected to other peers, you often feel a desire to help improve the system. I'm sure if you are working in peer support, you know there's more peer support needed. And you may want to do something to help improve that effort, or help improve employment, or help improve housing. So advocacy can be part of connecting to a higher purpose. You may also want to advocate for bringing recovery to others. Not all agencies, not all organizations understand recovery or have heard about recovery. And when we talk about being a recovery advocate, you can talk about recovery, talk about your recovery, and that can be really satisfying and connecting to a higher purpose and building connections. And you may want to advocate on other issues. You may want to join with other organizations, housing organizations, political organizations. There's lots of groups in the community that need volunteers to help sustain their efforts. And when you join an advocacy group or work on an issue, you can definitely build connections that way. So in Washington, here are a few ideas of networking opportunities. There's United Peers of Washington. They have a Facebook page, and they try to do activities around the state, and they're a growing organization of peers. There's the Washington Recovery Alliance, based in Seattle, and they do a lot of really good events, and they also have a website, and they're large. They have gained a lot of traction, numbers-wise and politically. There's the National Alliance on Mental Illness, which I mentioned before. They have a lot of activities and a lot of groups, especially for families. The OCP has webinars and activities. We're having a leadership conference next week, which I believe is at capacity, but those kind of activities are wonderful times to meet people and find peers that you might want to make further connections with. And then there's local boards and advisory groups. You can call some of the managed care organizations or the accountable communities of health or your provider agency and ask if there's advisory groups. And those are great ways to advocate and to network with other peers. And those are just a few of options that can give you an opportunity to meet peers and join in advocacy. So here's a quote from Goethe. The world is so empty if one thinks only of mountains, rivers, and cities, but to know someone who thinks and feels with us and who, though distant, is close to us in spirit, this makes earth for us an inhabited garden. And that is the end of the webinar, unless there are questions that Amanda would like to send my way.
We'll see if any field through. Thank you so much, Jennifer. That was so amazing. There was a lot of really great responses. I just want to say that somebody in here said that they came to this webinar for their clients, but they were finding it more applicable to their personal life than they anticipated, and they were very grateful for that. So I thought that was such a great compliment, and I wanted you to hear that directly.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Isn't that great? This was such a fantastic webinar, and I can't wait to get it out to everybody, and so everyone can hear it. There's a lot of thank yous, and a lot of people excited about getting this sent back out so that they can read and listen and share with other colleagues as well. So if you do have questions, feel free to write them in the chat box, raise your hand. I could probably pull you off mute. But Jennifer, this was fantastic. Thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. This was fun to do. And it made me think a lot too, personally.
Well, that's great. And I appreciate you sharing your story with us. That was wonderful. It's always nice to have something personal to pull from like that and be able to relate to.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, gosh, it's a little early, but if we don't have any questions and there's no active conversation, I guess we can give people some of their Thursday back. What do you think?
I think so too. Thank you very much for inviting me. This was great. So have a good day, everyone.
thank you for sharing your information, and thank you for sharing your story. And I hope to have you come and speak again soon for us. And lots of thank yous on the chat box for you. So.
Okay, great.
Okay,
All right.
well,
Bye,
thank you
everyone.
again, Washington. Thank you again, Washington State. We appreciate all of your time, and we hope to see you next or hear from you next month on our follow-up. And we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye then.
Bye.